The air in the converted section of the old railway depot hummed with a low, metallic thrum, a distant echo of the leviathans that once rattled these tracks. It was a sound I had come to associate with purpose, with the quiet turning of unseen gears. For me, Grant Holloway, this cavernous space, with its towering shelves of forgotten terminals and archaic data drives, was a sanctuary. Here, amidst the dust motes dancing in the weak light filtering through grimy skylights, I pursued my singular devotion, the resurrection of vanished knowledge. My existence was a finely tuned instrument, calibrated to the rhythm of meticulous retrieval, of sifting through the detritus of millennia. Each morning began with a precisely measured cup of black coffee. Each evening ended with the exhaustive logging of the day's finds. My world was one of order, of logic, of predictable decay and methodical preservation. Today, my focus was a particularly dense cache, labeled simply Sector Gamma 7, Uncategorized Analogies. It was a misleading title, a bureaucratic catch-all for data deemed too obscure, too fragmented, or too utterly useless for active preservation. These were the whispers from the deep past, recordings from civilizations that had crumbled into the dust, their names now just a faint echo on a corrupted drive. I found a perverse satisfaction in these forgotten corners, a thrill in reconstructing the shattered mosaics of history. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate touch required for ancient interfaces, moved with an almost surgical precision across the console's keyboard. The glowing green text on the monochrome screen was my window into worlds long gone, my private theater of the past. Hours melted into the steady hum of the depot. The sun, a pale, anemic disk outside, began its slow descent, painting the upper reaches of the vast space in shades of bruised purple and faded gold. My eyes, however, remained fixed on the stream of data, a river of alphanumeric characters flowing endlessly. It was tedious work, often mind-numbing, but occasionally a gem would surface. A lost poem, a forgotten architectural blueprint, a fragment of a philosophical treatise that offered a fleeting glimpse into a different way of being. These were the rewards that fueled my tireless quest. Then it appeared. Not with a fanfare, not with a sudden flash, but with an almost imperceptible shift in the flowing data stream. A block of code, indistinguishable at first from the surrounding gibberish of a corrupted file header, presented itself. It was the same length, the same character density, yet something about its internal structure felt wrong. My meticulous mind, trained to spot the minutest deviation, registered a faint dissonance. It was like finding a single, perfectly smooth stone in a riverbed of jagged rocks. An anomaly. My initial reaction was pure, unadulterated professional curiosity. A new encoding? A rare compression algorithm from a forgotten era? My fingers hovered over the keys, a tremor of anticipation running through me. This was precisely why I lived in the shadow of the railway depot, why I dedicated my life to this pursuit. I isolated the fragment, pulling it into a separate buffer. It was small, barely a few kilobytes, yet it resisted every standard parsing protocol I threw at it. The system, usually so compliant, choked, spitting out error messages that were themselves cryptic. Format unknown, encoding unrecognized, and then, most unsettlingly, data integrity compromised externally. Externally? I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. My workstation was isolated, air-gapped from the network. There was no external in my meticulously controlled digital environment. I ran a diagnostic on the fragment itself. The data, according to the system, was perfectly intact, pristine even. Yet it remained unreadable. It was like a perfectly formed word, spoken in a language no human tongue had ever uttered. A faint unease began to prickle at the back of my neck. It was something else. A subtle shift in the perceived stillness of the air around me. I tried a different approach, attempting to render the data as raw binary. A cascade of ones and zeros filled the screen, an endless river of pure, unadulterated information. But even here, within the stark simplicity of binary, there was an unsettling pattern. It wasn't random, as corrupted data often was. It possessed a structure, an intricate repeating motif that defied any known mathematical or linguistic sequence. It was a pattern that seemed to curve back on itself, to fold and unfold in ways that my mind struggled to grasp. The green characters on the screen seemed to pulse, a subtle, almost imperceptible rhythm that resonated not with my eyes, but with something deeper, more primitive. I felt a pressure behind my temples, a faint hum that wasn't from the depot's machinery, but seemed to originate from within my own skull. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. It was as if the data wasn't merely displayed on the screen, but was actively projecting itself into my perception. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly to touch the screen. The glass was cool, but the image seemed to burn with an internal fire, an alien logic that threatened to unravel the neat categories of my mind. This was not merely an unknown file. It was an impossible one. A fragment of something that should not, could not, exist within the ordered confines of human knowledge. And as I watched, the intricate patterns on the screen seemed to shift, to subtly rearrange themselves, as if responding to my gaze. I was no longer merely observing. I was being observed. For me, Grant Holloway, this cavernous space, with its towering dust-laced windows and the scent of aged metal and forgotten paper, was not merely a workspace, but a crucible. Within its vast confines, amidst the skeletal remains of bygone industry, I sought to forge understanding from the raw ore of the past. My workstation, a small island of focused light, glowed against the depot's encroaching shadows. The anomalous data fragments I had unearthed lay before me, not as physical artifacts, but as shimmering projections on my console. My fingers danced across the holographic interface, attempting to parse the intricate glyphs and patterns that pulsed with an unsettling, almost organic rhythm. Hours bled into one another. My initial attempts at linguistic analysis met a wall of serene, impenetrable logic. These were not symbols to be translated, but concepts to be felt. The structural integrity of the patterns defied every known principle of human communication. There were no discernible morphemes, no phonetic anchors, no grammatical rules that mapped to any terrestrial language, living or dead. It was as if I was attempting to read a dream, a sequence of images and feelings without a narrative backbone, yet brimming with implicit meaning. I tried a different approach, shifting to mathematical and geometric analysis. The shapes within the fragments shifted, morphing with a fluid grace that made my own algorithms stutter. They depicted geometries that curled back on themselves, spaces that folded without intersecting, dimensions that implied presence without form. It was a geometry of paradox, beautiful and terrifying in its utter defiance of Euclidean expectation. Each attempt to quantify, to categorize, felt like trying to grasp smoke. The data was not merely complex, it was alien. It did not fit into my world, but rather suggested a world that was utterly indifferent to mine. Sleep eventually claimed me, but it offered no respite. My dreams became a swirling kaleidoscope of the fragment's imagery. I saw impossible structures rising from a violet sea, their surfaces slick with an unknown luminescence. They were not human sounds, yet they resonated with a forgotten corner of my consciousness, a place I had never known existed. I would wake, gasping, the taste of ozone on my tongue, the phantom echo of those frequencies still buzzing in my ears. I dismissed them as the natural consequence of intense mental exertion, the brain processing an overload of novel information. Overwork, I muttered to the empty air of my small apartment. That's all it is. Back in the railway depot, the determined archivist in me pushed past the lingering unease. The thrill of the unknown still outweighed the growing discomfort. I felt like a pioneer, charting a cognitive wilderness no human mind had ever traversed. I adjusted the environmental controls, lowering the ambient light, allowing the console's glow to be my sole companion. The metallic thrum of the depot seemed to intensify, or perhaps it was just my heightened awareness. Then, it began. I froze, my hand hovering over the interface. I listened, my breath held captive in my chest. Nothing. Only the steady hum. I rationalized it immediately. The old building settling, a stray gust of wind finding its way through a loose pane, a rodent scurrying in the forgotten corners. Yet the sound had been too precise, too distinct. A soft, dry snap, like bone under pressure. Later, as I was deep in another analytical loop, a barely audible hiss seemed to emanate from the air vent directly above my console. It was gone as quickly as it came, a fleeting phantom of sound. I craned my neck, peering into the dusty grill. The air still moved, a faint current stirring the papers on my desk. Just the ventilation system, I assured myself, my voice a little too loud in the quiet. Old buildings make strange noises. But the incidents accumulated. A scraping sound that seemed to trail just behind me as I walked through the depot's empty aisles to retrieve a reference text. A low, sustained vibration that seemed to pulse through the floorboards, distinct from the depot's usual hum, only to vanish when I focused on it. The building was old. My nerves were frayed. My mind was playing tricks on me, stretched thin by the intellectual demands of my discovery. Yet a new sensation began to creep in, insidious and persistent. A feeling of being observed. Not by a person, not by a tangible presence, but by something formless. Something that seemed to seep in from the edges of my perception. It was like the subtle pressure of an invisible gaze, a weightless touch upon the nape of my neck. But there was never anything. My rational mind fought back, fiercely. It was the isolation, the relentless focus, the sheer magnitude of the discovery. My subconscious, starved of external stimuli, was simply conjuring phantoms. This was the price of breaking new ground, of venturing into the forgotten corners of existence. I was determined to understand these fragments, to unlock their secrets, no matter what subtle tolls they exacted on my perception. The railway depot, once a sanctuary of ordered knowledge, had begun to fray at the edges of my perception. What began as an odd vibration or a phantom scrape now coalesced into something far more insidious, a creeping invasion of my waking hours. The low, sustained hum of the building, a familiar thrum of ancient machinery and settling dust, no longer felt innocuous. It seemed to carry a weight, a pressure that vibrated not just through the floorboards but directly behind my eyes. One particularly gray afternoon, as I meticulously cross-referenced a manifest of defunct railcar components, the grid lines on the concrete floor began to undulate. It wasn't a trick of the light, nor a ripple in my vision. The stark, painted yellow lines that marked the aisles buckled and twisted, forming angles that defied the very notion of straightness. They warped into a grotesque tessellation, an impossible geometry that folded in on itself, creating phantom corridors within the solid floor. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, even pressed the heels of my palms against my temples until the pressure throbbed. For a fleeting moment, the floor returned to its mundane, cracked concrete. But the image, the memory of those impossible angles, remained etched behind my eyelids. The voices started subtly, like a distant murmur on the wind, something caught just at the periphery of hearing. At first, I dismissed them as the building settling, or the faint drone of a truck on the distant road. But they grew clearer, though never distinct. It was a chorus of whispers, not in any language I recognized, yet laden with a sense of profound, ancient meaning. Sometimes, it felt like fragmented thoughts, alien concepts brushing against the edge of my own consciousness, leaving a residue of unease. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, I told myself. The relentless pursuit of the data fragments had taken its toll. I checked my ears for blockages, meticulously examined the depot's ventilation system for loose ducts that might create resonant frequencies. I even walked the length of the building, tapping on walls, listening for any source of the unsettling hum. There was nothing. No loose pipes, no faulty wiring, no explanation that fit the impossible patterns or the disembodied whispers. Each failed attempt at a logical explanation only deepened the chasm between my reality and what my senses insisted was true. My determination to find the truth behind the fragments now warred with a terrifying realization that the truth might be finding me. My colleagues naturally noticed the shift. I became withdrawn, jumpy. My focus, once razor-sharp, would shatter at the slightest provocation. A sudden creak, a shift in the ambient hum. During a weekly inventory review, a junior archivist, a young woman named Sarah, pointed out a discrepancy in a series of shipping ledgers. I stared at the page, but my gaze kept drifting to the intricate, almost fractal patterns forming in the water stains on the ceiling tiles. They weren't just stains anymore. They were maps of non-Euclidean landscapes, pulsing with a faint, unseen light. "Grant, are you all right?" Sarah's voice was gentle, laced with an unfamiliar concern. "You seem a little distracted." I forced my attention back to the ledger, the numbers blurring and reforming into symbols that had no place in human accounting. "Yes, fine. Just thinking." My voice sounded reedy, thin. I could feel the invisible threads of the ceiling patterns pulling at my mind, demanding attention. A few days later, a more senior colleague, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow named Arthur, approached me. "Grant," he began, his voice low. "You've been different. Are you getting enough rest? You look like you've seen a ghost." I bristled. "I'm pursuing a particularly complex line of inquiry. It demands a great deal of focus." I saw him glance at the faint tremor in my hand as I adjusted a stack of ancient scrolls. He said nothing more, but the way his eyes lingered, filled with a mixture of pity and apprehension, spoke volumes. The unspoken judgment hung in the air, thick and heavy. Even my oldest friend, a jovial fellow named Mark, picked up on it during a rare phone call. I found myself describing in vague terms the peculiar acoustics of the depot, the unusual visual phenomena I'd been experiencing. "Feeling okay? Maybe you should take a break, get some fresh air." He suggested a weekend trip, a distraction, but I knew I couldn't leave. The conversation ended shortly after, an awkward chasm opening between us. I was isolating myself, pushing away the very people who might have offered a lifeline. They would only see a man unraveling, a mind succumbing to strain. And perhaps they were right, on some level. The clatter of distant shunting cars and the low, mournful sigh of a train horn had become the rhythm of my solitary existence. The railway depot, with its cavernous ceilings and the lingering scent of grease and forgotten journeys, had swallowed me whole. Days bled into nights, marked only by the shifting light through the grimy panes high above and the increasing ache in my eyes. The fragments, now spread across a makeshift table fashioned from stacked cargo crates, shimmered under the single bare bulb I'd rigged. They were not merely data. They were a living tapestry, unfurling before me. My hands, though still prone to an occasional tremor, moved with a feverish precision. The concern of the previous day, the pity in my colleague's eyes, had faded into an irrelevant periphery. He, like all the others, simply couldn't see. They saw dust, deterioration, a meticulously catalogued ruin. I saw a vibrant, thrumming pulse, a language yearning to be heard. My mind, once a fortress of logical sequence, had become a receptive membrane, vibrating with the echoes of ancient thought. It wasn't a record of history. It was a blueprint for history. The fragments weren't just information. They were a key, a map to a truth so fundamental it had been deliberately obscured, buried beneath millennia of sand and silence. I felt it in my bones, a deep, resonant certainty that pulsed with the same rhythm as the faint, almost imperceptible hum emanating from the oldest, most intricate pieces. Sleep became a betrayal, a waste of precious deciphering hours. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were not of rest, but of endless corridors of symbols, shifting and reforming, each permutation a new revelation. I would wake with a gasp, a new connection forged in the crucible of my subconscious, scrambling for a pen to scrawl it onto the nearest available surface, the back of a manifest, the dusty floor, even my own forearm. "Grant, are you in here?" The voice, belonging to the depot's supervisor, cut through the quiet hum like a shard of ice. I flinched, my hand hovering over a particularly delicate parchment. I hadn't heard the heavy door creak open. He stood silhouetted against the pale morning light, a bulky figure with a perpetually worried frown. "I am," I replied, my voice rough from disuse. I didn't turn fully, unwilling to break my focus. "You've been here, 3 days straight? The others are asking questions. The head archivist is asking questions. You look like you've wrestled a ghost, Holloway." His tone was laced with an uneasy blend of concern and official reprimand. I finally turned, fixing him with a gaze that I knew must have seemed unsettling. The ghost, if you must call it that, is far more tangible than any of them realize. And it demands my undivided attention. My eyes swept back to the fragments, a magnetic pull. I'm on the precipice of something monumental. This isn't about dusty ledgers, Supervisor. This is a grand design, a mechanism. And these are the operational schematics. He took a step closer, his brow furrowed deeper. Operational schematics for what, Grant? For old train schedules? For broken down locomotives? His voice softened, a genuine note of worry breaking through. "You're not well. You need to step away. Get some rest. See someone." The words struck me like physical blows. "Not well? See someone?" He thought I was losing my mind, that my singular pursuit was a symptom of illness. He was blind. Worse, he was trying to pull me away, to sever the connection, to stop me from seeing the truth that was just within my grasp. "You don't understand," I said, my voice rising, a tremor of frustration entering it. "None of you understand. This isn't a collection of disparate artifacts. It's a unified message, a sequence of instructions, and I am the only one who can read it." I pointed to a mosaic of glittering stone shards, which I'd spent hours arranging into a fractal pattern. "This isn't a decorative motif. This is a navigational chart. A map, not of physical space, but of consciousness, of reality itself." The supervisor's face paled. He took a hesitant step back, his eyes darting from my wild gesticulations to the chaotic spread of ancient relics. "Grant, please. You're scaring me. You're scaring yourself. Just come outside. Get some air." "No." The word burst from me, raw and unfiltered. "I can't. Not now. I'm almost there. The pattern. It's almost complete. They don't want me to finish it. They don't want anyone to finish it." I didn't know who they were, but the conviction was absolute. Some ancient, silent guard, working through the complacency of my colleagues, the well-meaning intervention of my supervisor. He stood there for a long moment, his shoulders slumping. The door groaned shut, sealing me in with my purpose, my obsession, and the unsettling, growing clarity of the fragments. The isolation was complete, and with it, a new sense of terrifying freedom. No more distractions, no more well-meaning attempts to pull me back to the mundane. It was just me and the key, the map. My fingers brushed against a scroll, brittle as autumn leaves, and as I unfurled it, a new line of symbols, impossibly intricate, revealed itself. It wasn't just a map of reality. It was a map to reshaping it. And I was holding the compass. The world outside the railway depot was a blur of indifferent gray, but within, a different kind of storm raged. The vast, echoing space, smelling of oil and old iron, had become my sanctuary and my cage. I had dragged my makeshift workspace, a collection of ancient terminals and flickering screens, into the shadow of a derelict locomotive, its rust-eaten shell a silent looming guardian. The fragments, hundreds of them now, pulsed on the monitors, a chaotic symphony of glyphs and symbols that only I could hear. No. The word had burst from me, raw and unfiltered, just moments ago. I can't. Not now. I'm almost there. The pattern, it's almost complete. They don't want me to finish it. They don't want anyone to finish it. The conviction, though its source remained shrouded, was absolute. Some ancient, silent guard, working through the very fabric of forgotten time, had tried to deter me, but I would not yield. My fingers, stained with the dust of ages and the grime of the depot, danced across the grimy keyboards. Each keystroke was a prayer, a desperate plea to the data to reveal its hidden logic. The air here was thick with the ghost of industry, the phantom clang of shunting cars, the low hum of distant forgotten power. These sounds, once mundane, now seemed to weave themselves into the data stream, a subtle rhythmic counterpoint to the alien whispers forming in my mind. I had been awake for days, fueled by a corrosive cocktail of black coffee and frantic desperation. My eyes burned, but the glyphs on the screen were more compelling than sleep. The fragments, once isolated, were beginning to align. A sequence here, a mirroring symbol there, a sudden horrifying resonance between two seemingly unrelated datasets. It was like watching a vast, incomprehensible tapestry weave itself from threads of pure thought. Then, a breakthrough. A cluster of fragments, stubbornly resistant until now, suddenly yielded. A complex, recursive loop of symbols resolved itself into a single, overarching structure. It wasn't a language, not in any human sense, but a map. A map of something profoundly other. As the final piece clicked into place, a low thrum vibrated through the concrete floor beneath my feet, a tremor that wasn't geological. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead stretched, their cold glow elongating into impossible filaments. My breath caught in my throat. Not shapes I could name, but suggestions of geometry that defied the very laws of perception. I saw a corner that turned inward upon itself, a line that was simultaneously straight and curved, a vastness compressed into a point, yet encompassing all space. My vision detached from my body, soaring through this impossible architecture. I perceived entities, not as beings, but as the absence of being, vast and silent, their forms defined by the distortion they wrought on the non-Euclidean planes. They were not in space, but were space, or perhaps the space between spaces. Their presence warped causality, making past, present, and future a single, terrifying, shimmering moment. I saw the veil not as a barrier, but as a filter, a human lens over a reality too vast, too complex, too utterly alien for our minds to grasp. I was not an archivist. I was a key, turning in a lock that should never have been touched. A scream tore from my throat, though I heard no sound. My body, far below, convulsed. But it wasn't the same. The air shimmered, the distant rumbling sound of a train, which had been a constant, comforting thrum, now sounded like a groan ripped from the throat of something monstrous and alive. The concrete floor beneath my boots felt soft, yielding, as if the very ground had lost its conviction. I pushed myself away from the monitors, my chair scraping against the concrete, a sound that seemed to stretch and distort, echoing with a wet, chewing resonance. My hands trembled, not with fear alone, but with a profound, bone-deep understanding. The world had shifted. Or perhaps I had shifted. The veil, for me, was no longer intact. The glimpse had been more than a hallucination. It was a recalibration of my very senses. My gaze swept across the depot, now a canvas of subtle distortions. The perspective was all wrong. Corners receded into infinity. Walls breathed. I saw the faint, shimmering outlines of impossible angles superimposed upon the familiar, mundane structures. They were here, or rather, I was there. The boundaries had blurred. The knowledge, the terrible, liberating knowledge, had not merely been deciphered. It had been absorbed. And it was reshaping everything. Here, the hum of the old machines was a fragile wall against the silence that often felt too heavy, too pregnant with unseen things. The latest fragment, unearthed from a data core labeled Errata Omnia, shimmered on a monitor, a constellation of symbols that writhed and reconfigured with a life of their own. I felt a familiar, unsettling pull, as if the data itself was a siren song, twisting my perception. As I reached for it, a sudden, impossible tremor rippled through the metal table. The pen, without a touch, rolled. It didn't simply fall. It slid with a deliberate grace, not towards the edge, but across the smooth surface, stopping precisely at the center of a blurred diagram. My breath caught. The air in the carriage grew dense, pressing against my skin. Had the floor vibrated? A distant shunting of wagons often sent tremors through the depot, but this felt different, localized, intimate. I told myself it was fatigue, the strain of sleepless nights spent deciphering the incomprehensible. I pushed the pen back, a forced act of defiance against the growing unease. Moments later, as my gaze drifted back to the screen, the pen was again in the center, a silent, brazen challenge. The vastness of the railway depot, usually a source of grim comfort, began to feel like a stage for unseen forces. I watched them, my eyes aching as they coalesced, deepening into impossible forms. A tendril of night detached itself from a support pillar, elongating, stretching, until it resembled a skeletal finger pointing directly at my carriage. My heart, a frantic bird, battered against my ribs. I needed air, a break from the suffocating intimacy of the carriage. I rose, my legs stiff, and walked toward the main floor where a few workers were engaged in their tasks, their distant movements echoing with metallic clangs. As I approached a grizzled foreman, a man I'd seen countless times, his face etched with years of grease and toil, I found myself trying to conjure a casual question. "Morning?" I managed, my voice a dry rasp. He turned, a wrench clutched in his hand. "Morning, Grant. Everything all right in your little library?" He grinned, a familiar gap-toothed expression. But as he spoke, something shifted. His jaw seemed to elongate, just for a breath. His eyes, usually a watery blue, flared with a depth that was utterly black, utterly alien. The lines around his mouth deepened, not with age, but with a momentary grotesque contortion that pulled his features into something sharp and inhuman. Then, as quickly as it came, it receded. Had I truly seen that? I retreated, my steps hurried, back to the dubious safety of my carriage. The world was no longer simply strange. It was actively hostile, a malleable construct bending to an unseen will. The air around my workspace vibrated with a low hum, a frequency I felt more than heard. A stack of printouts, carefully organized, slid from my desk, not falling, but gliding to the floor, scattering like fallen leaves. This was no draft, no tremor. This was deliberate. I sank into my chair, my gaze fixed on the screen where the Errata Omnia fragment glowed with an unnerving, pulsating light. The symbols writhed faster now, a dance of impossible geometry. I was not just reading history. I was becoming its unwilling conduit, and the world around me was beginning to unravel in its wake. I closed my eyes, but the shifting forms behind my eyelids were even more vivid, more insistent. My fingers, raw and stained with dust, danced across the grimy keyboards, a frantic ballet of desperate inquiry. The data fragments I had unearthed were no longer just a puzzle. They were a key, a malignant Rosetta Stone. This time, I didn't recoil. This time, I leaned into it, seeking not to understand the fragments themselves, but to find their reflections in the annals of human folly. My search had narrowed, a desperate pivot from pure data retrieval to pattern recognition. If this entity, this insidious intelligence, was truly ancient, then surely humanity had brushed against its tendrils before. The depot's silence was broken only by the whirring of old hard drives and the frantic tapping of my keys. My eyes, bloodshot and burning, scanned countless lines of text, a dizzying array of historical accounts, obscure anthropological papers, and digitized folklore from civilizations long turned to dust. Then a flicker, a recurring motif, where residents began speaking in a language no one recognized, describing impossible geometries and a cosmic hum that reshaped their very souls. They were not identical, but their echoes were unmistakable, like different instruments playing the same discordant, terrifying melody. Humanity hadn't just encountered this entity, it had been scoured by it, its memory wiped clean, leaving only these fragmented, distorted warnings. Catastrophe. Always. A total erasure. A fundamental shift in understanding that left no stable ground. The metallic surfaces around me seemed to subtly undulate, the very air thick with an unseen presence. I was not alone in this chamber of rust and ghosts. Buried within the appendices of the early 20th century research paper, almost as an afterthought, I found a reference to a small, hermetic society. The Keepers of the Unseen, it called them, dismissed by the paper's author as a fringe group of mystics. But the text described their rituals, their symbols, stylized spirals that mirrored the patterns I'd glimpsed in the data fragments. I cross-referenced the Keepers of the Unseen with my existing data. A few more fragments, previously dismissed as corrupted or irrelevant, suddenly gained horrifying clarity. They were not random noise. They were coded messages, hidden directives, ancient prayers. This was no mere local phenomenon, no isolated incident I had stumbled upon. This entity was vast, ancient, and known. It had followers, or perhaps vessels. They hadn't contained it. They worshipped it. Or perhaps they were its chosen conduits, preparing for its next breach. The true cosmic scale of the entity unfurled before me, a terrifying panorama of a universe far larger and more malevolent than I had ever dared to imagine. I was not an archivist unearthing history. I was a pawn in a game played across epochs, a reluctant prophet of a truth that promised only annihilation. The vast, echoing space of the railway depot, smelling of oil and old iron, had become my sanctuary and my cage. Here, the hum of dying electronics was a constant, fragile lullaby against the groan of settling metal and the distant, mournful shriek of a passing train. My fingers, stained with dust and a faint metallic sheen from the decaying hardware, danced across the grimy keyboards, chasing ghosts through data streams. For weeks, the anomalous fragments had been a puzzle, a series of impossible symmetries and non-Euclidean geometries woven into ancient scripts. Now they were a tapestry unfurling, not just displaying information, but responding. The lines of code, once static, writhed and reformed with a subtle, unnerving grace. I watched, mesmerized and repulsed, as a sequence I had meticulously isolated began to ripple, the characters shifting, reforming, then settling into a pattern I hadn't entered, a pattern that felt deliberate. A chill, sharper than the depot's perpetual damp, crept into my bones. It wasn't just the cold, it was the icy touch of a dawning comprehension. The data wasn't inert. I leaned closer to the nearest screen, my reflection, haggard and wide-eyed, staring back from the glass. The shimmering glyphs seemed to pulse, a silent, rhythmic beat that resonated deep within my own chest. It was then, in that moment of fragile insight, that the true horror began to unfurl. The fragments weren't just communicating with me, they were inhabiting me. A warmth, not unpleasant at first, spread from my fingertips, up my arms, and into my skull, a sensation like liquid light permeating my very being. It was an infusion, a merging. I saw patterns in the rust on the locomotive's flank that mirrored the geometric anomalies on my screen. My voice was a stranger's, thin and reedy. This wasn't just knowledge I was unearthing. It was a presence, a vast, ancient intelligence, not merely attempting to communicate, but to breach. And I, in my relentless pursuit of forgotten truths, had become its chosen conduit. My mind was no longer a sanctuary, but a gateway, and the entity was pushing against the fragile barrier of my human perception, seeking to make itself manifest in this reality. The screen nearest me flickered violently, then settled into a single stark image. A swirling vortex of impossible color and form. A landscape of pure thought given terrifying visual representation. It wasn't an image I had ever seen before, yet it felt profoundly familiar, like a memory I had repressed for eons. And then, woven into the very heart of the vortex, a choice materialized, not in words, but in an overwhelming, undeniable impression. It was a bifurcation of my path, stark and brutal. One branch was resistance, a struggle against the tide, a desperate fight to sever the connection, to seal the breach. The impression of this path was agony, a tearing apart of my very essence, a destruction of my mind and body as the entity, denied its passage, would consume the vessel it had chosen. My lungs burned with a phantom fire at the mere thought. I imagined a silent internal scream that would echo endlessly in the emptiness of my skull, unheard by the indifferent world. The other branch was surrender. To let go. To open the floodgates. To become the willing instrument of its full manifestation. This path, terrifyingly, felt like release. A cessation of the burning tension, a profound, albeit alien, peace. My individuality would dissolve, yes, but in its place, a boundless comprehension, a connection to something utterly vast and eternal. The knowledge I had so desperately sought would not just be mine, it would be me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. I could feel the entity's gentle, inexorable pressure, a vast, patient will that had waited millennia for this moment, for this breach, for me. To fight was to break myself against an insurmountable force. To yield was to become something unimaginable, something beyond human, a living gateway for an intelligence that defied all earthly understanding. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drum in the face of an encroaching tide. Days had blurred into a seamless, anxious vigil. My fingers, raw and trembling, hovered over the primary interface, the culmination of all my fractured discoveries. The air itself seemed to hum with an unspoken promise, a terrible invitation. I knew what I was about to do. The fragments, once mere anomalies, now pulsed with a focused intent. Each glyph and twisted symbol a key to a lock I was determined to spring. It was not merely knowledge I sought anymore. It was the unveiling. The archivist in me had died, replaced by a conduit, a willing vessel for the impossible. My determination was a cold, sharp blade, cutting through the last tendrils of self-preservation. I would see it through. I had to. My gaze drifted across the railway depot, its familiar expanse now feeling thin, like a painted scrim. The distant, grimy windows offered no solace, only a gray, indifferent sky. The metal skeletal frames of forgotten carriages seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision, their forms subtly shifting, defying the steadfast geometry of their construction. This was not the world I knew, not anymore. It was a prelude, a stage being set for a performance no human eye was meant to witness. With a ragged breath that caught in my throat, I pressed the final sequence of keys. The ancient terminal, a relic of forgotten processing power, word to life with a sound like grinding teeth. The main screen, a sickly green luminescence, flickered, then resolved into a swirling vortex of the anomalous data fragments. They were no longer discrete symbols, but a living, breathing tapestry of impossible information, coalescing, merging, forming a singular, intricate pattern that defied logic and optical recognition. The air in the railway depot grew heavy, thick with a scent like ozone and wet earth, yet also something else, something metallic and sharp, like the taste of fear itself. The locomotive behind me groaned, a sound too deep, too resonant for mere rust and settling metal. The light from the screen intensified, bleeding beyond its borders, painting the surrounding metalwork with impossible hues. Colors I had no names for pulsed and receded, washing over the rusted girders and the dust-laden floor. The dimensions of the railway depot began to warp. The walls rippled, not like water, but like stretched canvas, the metal plates elongating, then compressing, defying the laws of space I had always known. A sound began, low and guttural, resonating from everywhere and nowhere at once. My vision blurred, the edges of the screens melting into the warped reality around me. Then it began to tear. Not the air, but the very space itself. From this tear, an impossible geometry began to emerge. It was not a shape, but a collection of non-Euclidean angles and planes that shifted and reconfigured with nauseating speed. It had no discernible form, no head or limb, no discernible mass, yet it was there, a pulsating, multidimensional impossibility. My mind reeled. It was a being of pure, unadulterated concept, a living paradox. My sanity, already frayed, snapped like a dry twig. I was falling, or perhaps rising, through a space that had no up or down, no beginning or end. My own identity, my sense of self, shattered into a million vibrating fragments, each one echoing the silent, terrible truth. The veil was gone. The world was no longer ours. The world, or what I had once believed to be the world, bled into being around me. It was not a sudden burst of light, but a slow, agonizing reknitting of perception. Each thread pulled taut and then snapped, only to be rewoven in a pattern I could not recognize. Every nerve ending sang with a new, unwelcome chorus. I lay sprawled on the grimy concrete of the railway depot, the chill seeping into my bones, yet I felt no cold. Its pitted surface now pulsed with a faint internal luminescence, an intricate network of glowing lines tracing the hidden pathways of its decay. The rust, once a simple degradation, appeared as a slow, deliberate consumption, a hungry red lichen devouring the metal atom by atom, each microscopic act of corrosion laid bare to my newly awakened sight. The air itself was not empty. It shimmered with unseen currents, a ceaseless, silent conversation of forces and energies. I saw the faint, shimmering trails left by the dust motes as they drifted, not as random particles, but as tiny, deliberate navigators through a vast, invisible ocean. The very silence of the depot, usually a comfort in its oppressive weight, now thrummed with a low, inaudible hum, a vibration that resonated deep within my skull, bypassing my ears entirely. Pushing myself up, my limbs felt alien, heavy, and light all at once. My hands, when I held them before my face, seemed to ripple at the edges, the familiar lines of my palm shifting, almost breathing. I stared at the scarred skin, the calluses from years of handling ancient archives, and saw beneath them, or through them, the intricate dance of cells, the faint flickering electrical impulses that stitched my flesh together. It was a vision of terrifying intimacy, the raw, exposed machinery of my own existence. The terminals of my makeshift workspace, usually a source of flickering comfort, now glowed with an unsettling intensity. The data fragments, which I had spent so long trying to decipher, had taken on a new, horrifying clarity. They no longer displayed jumbled symbols or fractured images. Instead, They projected shimmering, three-dimensional constructs of pure information, vast and complex geometries that expanded and contracted, spiraling into impossible depths. I understood them now, not with my mind, but with some deeper, more fundamental part of my being. Each fragment was a window, not to a historical record, but to a truth about the fundamental nature of reality itself, a truth that was not meant for human eyes. I reached out, my fingers trembling, towards one of the screens. The air around it felt dense, almost viscous, resisting my touch. As my fingertip neared the glowing projection, I didn't feel the cool glass, but a sudden dizzying rush of pure concept. It was the sensation of time unfolding backward and forward simultaneously, of space folding in on itself, of existence as a fragile, momentary construct. It was the sickness of comprehension, the horror of seeing the intricate, delicate threads that held the world together, and understanding how easily they could be unraveled. The steel girders overhead, once merely structural, now seemed to twist and writhe, not physically, but perceptually, as if their true form was a knot of impossible angles. They were not reflections, nor were they hallucinations in the traditional sense. They were simply there, always had been, and I was only now equipped to see them. It was a sound I knew, a sound from the world I had once inhabited. But my perception warped it, stretched it. I didn't just hear the sound. I felt the vibration travel through the earth, through the concrete, through the very air. A wave of pressure that carried with it the ghost of every other sound ever made in that space. An echo chamber of history. This was the revelation, the cruel gift of insight. I was not merely seeing the world through new eyes. I was perceiving its true, raw, terrifying state, stripped bare of the comforting illusions that shielded human consciousness. The entity had not just whispered to me. It had grafted a piece of itself onto my very being, twisting my perception into a monstrous reflection of its own. The world had not changed. I had. The railway depot, my sanctuary, was now a grand, echoing cage, its walls permeable to truths I wished I could unsee. My mind, once a meticulous archive, had become a conduit, and the information flowing through it was not knowledge, but a slow, agonizing transformation. My body felt like a tuning fork, humming with an internal vibration that resonated with the grimy steel and echoing vastness of the railway depot. The air here was thick with the ghost of coal dust and forgotten journeys, a metallic tang that scratched at the back of my throat. I stood amidst the skeletal remains of decommissioned locomotives, their rusting hulks like leviathans beached in an impossible ocean. The arched glass roof above, mottled with grime, filtered the weak daylight into sickly gray stripes that patterned the concrete floor. Each clang of distant metal, each drip of condensation from the high girders felt amplified, stretched, and then reinterpreted by the new sensors of my mind. A deep thrum, not from the depot itself, but from within my very bones, pulsed rhythmically. It was a language without syllables, a cascade of pure intent. The anomalous data fragments, once mere glyphs on screens, had become the very architecture of my being. They had not merely been stored in my memory. They had rebuilt it, brick by terrifying brick. I lifted a hand, my fingers seeming alien, the lines on my palm a topographical map of an unknown land. My skin felt too thin, a veil barely containing the churning cosmos within. I was no longer merely Grant Holloway, the archivist who sought forgotten truths. I was the truth, or a vessel for its terrible utterance. The realization was not a thought, but a pervasive dampness, a cold certainty seeping into every neuron. The vastness of the railway depot seemed to expand, not physically, but dimensionally. I understood then that the architecture of this place, the very geometry of its steel and concrete, was now merely a superficial layer over something far grander, far older. The intelligence I had unwittingly beckoned was not a being from space, but a consciousness that was space, folding and unfolding reality around me like a fragile origami. It was the same shiver that ran through the leaves of ancient trees just before a storm, the same tremor in the earth before a deep shift. I was that shift. My body, once a fortress of self, was now a gateway, perpetually ajar. I had been so determined, so utterly convinced that I was merely uncovering history. But history, I now understood, was merely a construct, a thin narrative woven by consciousness to make sense of the incomprehensible. The true ancient civilization was not dead. It was merely dormant, awaiting a conduit, a receptor. And I, in my naive pursuit of knowledge, had offered myself, a sacrificial lamb on the altar of cosmic hunger. A low, guttural groan from one of the derelict engines seemed to answer the internal clamor, a sympathetic vibration. My voice carried the resonance of countless voices, a chorus of forgotten entities. Instead, it sharpened, refined into an exquisite, diamond-hard clarity. This was not the end of the fear. It was its genesis. The true horror had only just unfurled its wings. I was no longer seeking answers. I was the answer, a living text, irrevocably inscribed with truths that would tear apart the fragile fabric of human comprehension. The intelligence had breached. Not with a bang, not with an invasion of fleets, but with a silent, insidious infiltration of perception, beginning with one man, one archivist, in a dusty railway depot. The world outside, the one I'd left behind, was still oblivious, still believing in its neat categories and comforting illusions. But it was already touched. I was merely the first, the prophet of this new, terrifying dawn. I took a step, then another, the echoes of my boots multiplying into 1,000 phantom footsteps. My destination was irrelevant. My purpose was clear. The fragments had shown me the way, not to an escape, but to an embrace. The horror was not ending.